Majid Madani to recite Quran, followed by Khatm al-Quran Dua.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Rabbul mashriqaini wa Rabbul maghribain fabi'ayyi ala'i rabbikuma tukadziban. لهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان وله الجوار المنشآت في البحر كالأعلام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان صدق الله العظيم العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه على كل حال حمدا وآفي نعما ويكافي مزيده واعف عنا يا كريم يا رحيم يا ربي يا الله يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك ومجدك سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك اللهم صل على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم عليه اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وخطايانا كلها يا رب العالمين اللهم بلغ مرادنا وحصل مقاصدنا فاقض حوائجنا يا قاضي الحاجات اللهم يا غني يا حميد يا مبدئ يا معيد يا رحيم يا ودود يا حج يا قيوم برحمتك نستغيث اكفنا بحلالك عن حرامك وأغننا بطاعتك وفضلك عمن سواك اللهم أوصل وبلغ ثواب ما قرأناه من كلامك العزيز هذه هدية واصلة ورحمة نازلة وبركة شاملة وتحفة كاملة مقبولة مرضية متصلة منك إلى روح سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم خاصة خصوصا إلى روح من نبيناه مرحوم عبد العزيز اللهم اغفر له وارحمه اللهم اغفر له وارحمه وعافه واعف عنه وأكرم نزله ووسع مدخله وغسله بالماء والثلج والبرد ونقيه من الذنوب والخطايا كما ينقى الثوب الأبيض من الدنس ربنا رب ارحم والدينا رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا صل اللهم على النبي الأمي وآله وصحبه وسلم آمين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Extreme right, Mr. Khalid M. Farooq, President, guest today, Dr. ACL Amir Ali. Function is every year organized, joint, and today we have with us as chief guest Dr. ACL Amir Ali, who will be delivering the memorial oration. President of the Dr. M. Azeez Foundation, Mr. Khalid M. Farooq, to address you.
Dr. Ali Azeez and members of the Marhum Azeez family, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the annual Dr. Azeez oration. Today we have in our midst a learned scholar, a distinguished old boy of Zahir College, Dr. ACL Amir Ali, from the School of Business and Governance, Murdoch University, Australia. Incidentally, he happens to be a classmate of mine at Zahira. Dr. Amir Ali will be delivering the oration on the subject From Islamophobia to Westophobia, the long road to Islamist radicalization. We are thankful to Dr. Amir Ali for accepting our invitation to deliver the keynote address today. I must also mention that the learned doctor delivered an inspiring speech on an earlier occasion of the Azeez Commemoration Day. We are today gathered here to commemorate the death anniversary of Dr. Azeez. He was the foremost Muslim educationist, having the distinction of being the first Muslim civil servant, having excelled in the field of administration. Dr. Azeez took over as principal of Zahira College, Colombo, from Dr. T.V. Jaya. During his stewardship, Zahira excelled and flourished not only in the field of education, but also in the sports and other extracurricular activities, prompting a former Sri Lankan president to describe Zahira as one of the greatest public schools in our country. He was also honored being nominated as a senator to the upper house of the parliament. Among the many institutions established by Dr. Azeez, the All Ceylon YMA Conference and the All Ceylon Muslim Scholarship Fund continue to illuminate the lives of the Muslim community. Many may not know that Jamia Nalimia Birwala was initiated by Marhum Nalim Hajar along with Marhum Azeez, and today it stands out as a leading higher educational institution. I am duty bound to thank the All Ceylon YMA Conference, of which I am also part of it, for continually associating with the Azeez Foundation to commemorate this annual event. Also, I would like to thank Mr. A.I. Marika, another old classmate of mine, for writing a very interesting article on Dr. Azeez for publication in the print media, and also for agreeing to propose the vote of thanks. I sincerely thank all of you for your kind presence and participation on this occasion in remembering Dr. Azeez. Wassalam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Farooq, for your address. Mr. Farooq actually became the president of the Dr. Azeez Foundation, succeeding Marhum SHM Jamil, who was the president earlier. Next on the agenda, I would like to invite Mr. M.N.M. Nafeel, the national president of the All Ceylon YMA Conference, to address.
Respected members of clergies, our guest speaker, Dr. ACL Amir Ali, Mr. Khalid M. Farooq, President of the Dr. Azeez Foundation, Mr. M.S. Rahim, Secretary, Mr. Ali Azeez, and members of the Marhum Azeez family, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, Aibovan, Wanakam. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the annual Dr. Azeez Memorial Oration. Since the sad demise of Marhum Azeez, the All Ceylon YMA Conference had been commemorating his death anniversary from year 1975. The first commemoration function was held under the chairmanship of District Judge with Mr. S.M. Kamaldeen as Secretary. Azeez Foundation, the YMMA collaborated with Dr. A.M.A. Azeez Foundation in organizing the memorial oration. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very much pleased to welcome Dr. Amir Ali. I am the first national president of All Ceylon YMMA Conference from the Eastern Province, and it gives me added pleasure to welcome the learned speaker who also hails from the East. All are aware that marhum A.M.A. Azeez was the founder of All Ceylon YMMA Conference. In his own words, the organization was inaugurated to meet a new generation of men worthy of the highest tradition of Islam and capable of highest deeds to serve this country in every branch of modern life. I wish to thank Dr. Azeez Foundation in organizing this memorial oration in association with All Ceylon YMMA Conference. We will move forward with faith, unity, and discipline. I thank you all for your presence on these occasions. Wassalam, Nandri, Ayuvan.
BA Honours Ceylon. Masters London, PhD, West Australia. He is a Sri Lankan scholar domiciled in Australia. He is a senior academic lecturing in economics at Murdoch University in Perth. He was a former student of Zaira College when A.M.A. Azeez was the principal. Apart from his speciality in economics, he has developed a keen interest in Muslim affairs, and in that respect, he has published numerous research articles in international journals and presented several papers at international conferences. He is heavily involved in Muslim community affairs in Australia and was the Vice President and then President of the Australian Federation of Islamic Councils, holding each of those positions for 4 years respectively. He was also the head of the Muslim Advisory Group under the Howard government. Currently, he is one of the trustees of the Nurul Islam Society and Mirabuka Mosque in Perth. And I would like to invite Dr. Amir Ali to deliver the memorial oration from Islamophobia to Westophobia, the long road to Islamist radicalization. Mr. Amir Ali.
May peace be upon you all. Mr. Chairman, members of the Azeez Foundation and the All Ceylon YMMA organization, my friends, well-wishers, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to address this august audience, and on this occasion, for the second time in my life. When I addressed for the first time, I devoted quite a large number of time, or the space, to talk about the services that A.M.A. Azeez had done to this country and this community. I'm not going to repeat it now. I'll cut short my introduction about marhum A.M.A. Azeez. I'll get on to my topic because I think today it is the most burning topic in the world. I want to express my observations. I'm not going to claim that I am right, but I want to put forward what I have found throughout my research over the last 20 years at least. Abu Bakr Muhammad Abdul Aziz, popularly known as Senator Aziz, was not only an incomparable Muslim intellectual and educationist of his time, but also a staunch lover of Islam and a keen observer of the developments in his own community as well as in the Muslim world in general. In all his writings and speeches, one could detect the underlying influence of the Islamic religious and cultural spirit that shaped his thought and outlook. He was a lover of the poetry of Iqbal, and in an intellectual partnership with my father, Abdul Qadir Lebbe, who was also a poet and philosopher, Azeez was instrumental in introducing Iqbal to Sri Lankan literate public. He was yearning to see the return of the glorious days of Islamic civilization, when Muslims were at the cutting edge of scientific knowledge and rational thought. Had he lived today, I am certain that he would have been appalled at the strategic turn of events in the Muslim world in the 20th and 21st centuries, and at the reaction towards them from the outside. It is therefore fitting that this memorial lecture addresses a subject that would have been closer to Azeez's heart. Since the explosive entry of Al-Qaeda in 2001 and the Islamic State of Iraq and Shams, ISIS, in 2013, onto the international stage as violent political enterprises, the issue of Islamist, I'm not calling Islamic, Islamist radicalism and measures to combat the spread of that phenomenon has occupied international stage. However, the phenomenon of Muslim radicalization with the episodic manifestations of violence is not only a 21st century occurrence, but has its genealogical antecedents in the long historical relations between Europe and Islam. What I shall endeavor to do in the next few minutes is to trace that genealogy and address some of the root causes of Islamist radicalism. It is a refusal to look at these root causes by world leaders that has made Islamist radicalism an attractive alternative to a new generation of Muslims who feel victimized by the reigning world order. To start with, the fear and therefore the hatred of Islam, or what you might call it Islamophobia, my first box, started in medieval Christendom almost immediately after the birth of began their campaign of territorial expansion beyond the Arabian Peninsula. Islamdom, I'm borrowing a phrase from Marshall Hodgson, Islamdom posed an existential threat to the Latin Christian establishment. The Islamophobia thus emerged in Christendom, especially within its religious elite, condemned Islam as heresy, its prophet as Antichrist, and his followers as pagans. Christendom's response to Islam's challenge was understandably militaristic and not dialogical or evangelical. After several setbacks, the Battle of Tours in 723 and 11 years after the Battle of Poitiers were the first two of the military victories that Christendom achieved in its earliest encounter with Islam. It is from these encounters, memorable to the Christians but trivial to the Muslims, that one can find the origins of Europe and European identity in history. Islam is thus one of the conditions of Europe's emergence and identity. And if I may quote the historian Henry Pirenne, the Belgian historian, he put it very, very prettily that without Muhammad, Charlemagne would have been inconceivable. It was in the last quarter of the 11th century, however, and with the commencement of the First Crusade, that Islamophobia became a populist project in Europe. I underline that word, populist project in Europe. Pope Gregory VII's denunciation of the pagans and Saracens, and later Pope Urban II's address at Claremont, set the tone for an anti-Islamic discourse that was to become the first Christendom's, and later, after the French Revolution, the West's standard measure of judging Islam and Muslims. I'm sorry, the papers are sticking. The anti-Islamic discourse, born out of the Crusades, received further intellectual sustenance from the Orientalist project after the Enlightenment and provided the political and cultural justification for European colonization of the Muslim world. The same discourse became the basis of justification 1957 mutiny. And in the 21st century, it provided this pretext for the US invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. In promoting this anti-Islamic discourse, the role played by theologians in medieval Europe is replayed by the West, and particularly in the US by native informers. According to Muhammad Salam, an Egyptian sociologist, a scholar, the institutionalized Islamophobia, again I underline the word, institutionalized Islamophobia, was the lingering effects, these are his words, the lingering effects of a crooked history of an anti-Islamic discourse that not only legitimized colonial and imperial domination, but also managed to reproduce itself in the post-colonial and sustain its underlying xenophobic codes up to the present day, unquote. On the other hand, Christendom's anti-Islamic discourse did not mean that the Christian and Islamic worlds lived in isolation from each other. Economic, commercial, and intellectual intercourse increased over time, but it did not remove the anti-Islamic image that Europe nurtured. Instead, as in Andrew Wheatcroft of University of Stirling writes, I'm quoting here, the initial crudity of the image was made more subtle, both by adding new dimensions as circumstances changed, so that the crude parodies of the Prophet Muhammad tended to diminish, while other more baroque descriptions of Islamic virulence multiplied. Within the world of Islam, and within its political vocabulary, the name West, as we understand it today, was absent until the 19th century. For that matter, even to the Westerners, it was only in the 19th and early 20th century that the idea of the West acquired the role and range of meanings that are familiar for them today. However, as Hamid Dabashi of Columbia University argues, while the West was the self-congratulatory pronouncement of all things good and admirable, for Muslims, it became the symbolic construction of corrupted excellence, an object of discrete adoration and manifest hatred. In whichever way one looks at Islam, the binary Islam and the West is the product of the European colonial enterprise, and the name Islam itself, as a monolithic entity, devoid of its immense heterogeneity, is an imperial product. There's no Islam, but there are Islams. Even then, there was no Europhobia or hatred of Europe at that time by the Muslims, let alone Westophobia, because, as Bernard Lewis, the ardent critic of Islam, I'm quoting his words, because Muslim civilization, proud and confident of its superiority, could afford to despise the barbarous infidel in the cold and miserable lands of the north, and for the medieval Muslims in the Mediterranean lands, the Europeans, at least to the north and the west, was a remoter and more mysterious figure than the Indian, the Chinese, or even inhabitants of tropical Africa. While Christendom was denigrating Islam, Muslims, on the other hand, considered Christianity an imperfect religion and argued that Prophet Isa's true message was corrupted by his followers and therefore had to be renewed by a new and final message revealed to Prophet Muhammad. Thus, right through medieval period, Islam remained indifferent and uninterested in the backward and infidel peoples who lived in the lands to the north of the Mediterranean. So while Islamophobia, original Islamophobia was hatred of Islam, the Muslims ignored it. With the rise of Ottoman, however, Islamophobia in Europe metamorphosed into Turkophobia, or fear and hatred of the accursed Turk. In spite of this, however, there was never an anti-Europe or a counter-Christendom in the Islamic world. A determined indifference towards, if not total ignorance, of developments in the West might have been inconsequential to medieval caliphate, given Islam's expanding political power and self-proclaimed superiority of civilizations. But that indifference became dangerously obsolete by the end of the medieval era. I'm coming to the second stage. After the 15th century, and with the age of discoveries, the Enlightenment project and Europe's scientific and technological breakthrough, the center of political and economic gravity had started shifting away from the caliphate. It was a paradigm shift that witnessed the simultaneous rise of Europe and a parallel decline of Islamic empire. This shift, which began the process of Ottoman capitulation to European powers from the 16th century, advanced steadily so that by the end of the 19th century, almost the entire Islamdom had fallen under Europe's colonial domain. European conquest and colonization of Muslim Orient was Occident's ultimate payback for centuries of humiliation endured by Western Christendom. The entire Orientalist enterprise, spearheaded by Britain and France in the 18th and 19th centuries, until that leadership was taken over by the United States in the 20th, was, in the final analysis, not only an attempt to break the military might of Islamdom, but also to expropriate its economic resources, to reinforce through systemic indoctrination and propaganda an Orientalist view of Islam and its culture as backward, if not barbaric, and to prevent forever the re-emergence of an Islamic threat to the West. Yet, colonization of Islamdom did not automatically and immediately provoke Westophobia. The impact of colonization led to two contradictory strains of development in the Muslim world. On the one hand, there was a notable admiration of Western education and an increasing desire to adopt Western science and technology in the name of modernization and reforms. Muslim reformists and intellectuals like Rifa al-Tahtawi, Jamaluddin al-Ghani, Muhammad Abduhu, and Sir Said Ahmad Khan pinned their hopes for a Muslim regeneration and renaissance that will adopt the European model of scientific progress founded on the rational values of enlightenment. Such modeling entailed a total rejection of the Muslim traditionalism and a call for serious reinterpretation of the holy texts to meet the new demands. In a lecture delivered by Al-Afghani in the University of Istanbul, he asked a question point blankly. I'm quoting this question. My brothers, are we not going to take an example from the civilized nations? Let us cast a glance at the achievement of others. By effort, they have achieved the final degree of knowledge and peak of elevation. Only laziness, stupidity, and ignorance are obstacles to advance. End of quote. Even for Muhammad Iqbal, who abhorred blatant Western materialism and outright secularism, Europe's scientific advancement and democracy were to be the ideals for a resurgent Muslim society. Similarly, the Iranian scholar Sayyid Hussein Tazghizadeh, an ardent critic of Orientalists, appealed to the Iranians to become European, I'm quoting, from the top of the head to the tip of the toe. These are his words. In fact, behind the Edict of Gulhan in 1839 that heralded the Ottoman Tanzimat or reorganization was the tacit recognition that Europe was the exemplar of modern civilization and the Ottoman Empire its partner. Thus, European colonialism, in spite of its oppressive political institutions, exploitative economic structures, and humiliating cultural influence, did not create a hatred of the West, but a love towards Europe, or what I call Europhilia, the second box. It's a strange irony in the history of post-colonial Islamdom that the modernization programs undertaken by various Muslim nations provoked no Westophobia, as one might have expected after the colonial experience, but led to a kind of self-promoted and disfigured Islam cleansing. I use that term. Instead of, while admiring the Europe, they will also want to cleanse Islam of the traditional obstacles. Turkey under Mustafa Kemal went to the extreme of de-Islamizing its polity and economy in favor of wholesale westernization. The Pahlavi regime in Iran denounced the Semitic invasion of Islam and opted to go back to his pre-Islamic Aryan past as a step towards Western-style modernization. In Morocco and Jordan, a quasi-caliphate strategy was adopted to cover their overt westernization projects. In conservative Saudi Arabia also, in Said's view, the title of the monarch as the custodian of the two holy mosques appears to have been a cover for a diluted Kemalist strategy of modernization. In short, post-colonial modernity in Islamdom was not anti-Western, but pro-Western, and Westernization soon turned into Westoxification, or it is Occidentosis, my third box, the third stage. It was this kind of top-down Westoxification promoted by Muslim despots and tyrants and their bureaucratic and feudal supporters that provided the opposite strain of anti-Westernization and Westophobia. It was the same Al-Afghani, for example, who, while admiring these scientific achievements in the West and demanding the Muslim world to reform and modernize, condemned at the same time the Muslim rulers' readiness to sacrifice wholesale the religious and cultural edifice of Islam at the altar of Westernization. Demonization of the West, however, became an inseparable theme of radical politics within the Arab nationalism during the 50s and 60s. In the Middle East, the Nazarites and the Baathists, their disillusionment with the Western powers, especially with the United States over its lack of economic support to Egypt and Syria, pushed them into the arms of the Soviet camp and made them to adopt an anti-West stand in the interest of Arab socialism. Similarly, in Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and Lebanon, various socialist groups blended their political philosophy with national emotions and Arab unity and structured their agitation on an anti-Western platform. Even then, this anti-West posture did not turn into rabid Westophobia as it was to emerge much later. It was simply an ideological protest against capitalism and its imperialist superstructure. Can I get some water? Some water, please. Even Nazarism and Baathism, for that matter, were West-oriented secular movements which donned an Islamic garb in order to gain popular legitimacy. Westophobia, as a distinct Islamic response to the failures of all political and economic models hitherto experienced by the Muslim regime, was a post-1970 phenomenon. So Westophobia, as we understand today, is a post-1970 phenomenon. To the Islamists, not Islamics, Islamists, communism, socialism, and state capitalism are all products of the West and therefore to be shunned. However, unlike the anti-West stance of earlier decades, Westophobia in its late 20th century avatar incorporated into its philosophy not only the delegitimization and denial of Western models of political governance and economic development, but the entire epistemology that shaped them. The intellectual roots of Westophobia are to be found in the philosophy of three prominent Islamist intellectuals: Sayyid Qutb, Abu Ala Maududi, and Ayatollah Khomeini. There were others too, like Muhammad Abdu and Hassan al-Banna, but their writings were not as popular as the first three. Among the writings, speeches, and publications of this trio, Sayyid Qutb's Ma'alim al-Fit Tariq, that is the milestones in English, became undoubtedly the most cherished reading of the Islamists. The ideas of this new generation of Muslim thinkers and activists, in combination with the economic and political changes that dominated Muslim Middle East in the North Africa in the 1970s, marked by the financial clout of OPEC and the Islamized, not Islamic, Islamized Iranian revolution, paved the way for an Islamic resurgence whose ultimate objective was to Islamize the ruling political and economic world orders. Intellectually, Islamization, the fourth box, that project which saw Islam as the only solution to the world crisis, translated into a series of conferences, publications, and institutions in different parts of the Muslim world, and nurtured the idea that Western influence in Islamdom since the fall of the Ottoman Empire had been pernicious and therefore should be cleansed in order to create an Islamic polity, Islamic economy, Islamic society, and Islamic world order. Maududi has already set the tone of this Islamization and its corollary Westophobia in his passionate attack on European Renaissance that sowed, I'm quoting here, Maududi, the pernicious seed which has grown over the centuries into a massive and deadly tree. Its fruits are sweet, but poisonous. Its flowers are attractive, but full of thorns. Its twigs and branches are green and verdant, but are exhaling a deadly breeze which is imperceptibly poisoning the blood of all mankind. It's a long quote. You can read it in the printed version of this lecture. If European Renaissance and Enlightenment could be dismissed as jahil, as Qutb and Maududi perceived, then the practical and institutional manifestations that emanated from that civilization, such as democracy, individual freedom, equality, rule of law, and separation of the sacred from the mundane, will in totality automatically become blasphemous in the eyes of Islamists. In the words of Qutb, the entire basis of European thought became jahil, that's ignorance, and completely estranged from the Islamic concept, and even became contradictory and conflicting with it. Among his followers, Abu Bakr Bashir, the Indonesian Islamist, who was put into jail for getting involved in the bombing in Bali in 2002, was categorical in pronouncing that there is no democracy in Islam. These are his words. There is no democracy in Islam, so do not try to interpret the Quran and turn Islam into democracy. It's not democracy that we want, but Allahcracy. Democracy is shirk, that's blasphemy, and haram, forbidden. Again, Mullah Waqil, the confidant of Mullah Omar of Taliban, when interviewed by Ahmad Rashid, a political journalist, said that, these are Mullah Waqil's words, general elections are incompatible with Sharia and therefore reject them. Similarly, Anthony Pagton, the historian, quotes from another source that in Bangladesh, Imam Khadam al-Abadi al-Nasri addressed his congregation in May 2003 and said, these are his words, the West wants to distract you with shiny slogans like freedom, democracy, culture, and civil society, which is infidel corruption entering our society. The epistemological and rapturous break from an intellectual Westophobia advocated by Muslim ideologues of the Qutbian genre, who yearned for a future order through Islamic and cleansed of any undue influence of the other, and to be realized through educational and intellectual activism, to a radicalist and militant Westophobia that desired the same Qutbian goal, but through unmitigated violence and mayhem, as demonstrated by Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and the IS, is the unfortunate outcome of the globalizing nature of American imperialism with its neoliberal economic agenda. I repeat it. And this switch from educational changes to militant action is unfortunate development of the globalizing nature of American imperialism with its neoliberal economic agenda. Islamism, both in its moderate and radical dimensions, emanated from the psychological trauma experienced by the Ummah under the Western colonialism and imperialism. In the present day, Muslim was a destructive and humiliating impact of British and French colonialism, succeeded by US imperialism with its cornucopia of geopolitical aspirations, military adventures, and economic aggrandizement that transmuted moderate Islamism into its current militant variety. In line with this transmutation, the intellectual Westophobia was also radicalized into an intemperate Westophobia. If Islamism originated between the 18th and 20th centuries as a movement of intellectual resistance to colonial and imperial adventures and intended to provide an alternative ideological edifice and authenticity to colonist manufactured models of political governance and economic development, its ultra-radical manifestation in the 21st century signals the recognition of the failure of that ideological alternative and represents an uncompromising determination by a new generation of Muslims to redesign Islamism and to bring Islam as a master signifier back to the center stage of politics, economics, society, and culture. This 21st century Islamism an amorphous entity splintered by objectivity and subjectivity, but united in its methodology of unmitigated violence, was born out of the impotence of a Muslim leadership that abysmally failed to repair the injustices and humiliation inflicted upon the Ummah by yesterday's colonizers and today's imperialists. The phenomenon of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, as Dabashi says, must be read in the same vein as the radical mutation of the United States into a predatory empire. Unless one comprehends the enormity and depth of the injustice and humiliation which are at the root of present-day radicalization and Westophobia, any attempt to de-radicalize through security and military means will have only a negligible effect. What follows in the remainder of my lecture is not an exhaustive account of the fundamental issues that underline this militancy, but a brief introduction that contextualizes the current trend towards radicalization and violence. Historically, even if one were to ignore the demise of Muslim Spain on the eve of the 16th century and its impact on the Islamic Caliphate, the breakup of the Mughal Empire in 19th century India, and the decline and death of Ottoman Empire in the 20th century, followed by the conquest and subjugation of greater part of Islamdom by Western colonial powers, were the most painful and traumatic experiences endured by Muslims in the entire history of Islam. And that historical wound is still irking the collective consciousness of the Ummah. Although European and Euro-American colonialism has ended formally, coloniality in the sense of Western control and meddling in the political and economic affairs of Islamism, of the Muslim countries, persist. In fact, the Western manufactured world order that was put in place at the end of the Second World War and which continued to treat Islam as the external other did not have any room for a fractious Ummah to reunite and reconstruct its pre-colonial stature. In the eyes of the West, the Ummah is part of the subjugated non-West to be tutored and disciplined so that it would embrace the modernity and adopt the so-called universal values backed by Western powers. Caliphatization of Islamdom after 1924 had deprived the Muslim Ummah of political representation in the world stage. As Yasin Nakhte describes these words, Muslims have become, these words, organs without body or body without organs. Radical Islamism is the latest response to that deprivation and humiliation. Soon after September 11th, bombed, invaded, occupied, and destroyed Afghanistan and Iraq, 60 US intellectuals, including Francis Fukuyama, the man who wrote The End of History, and Samuel Huntington, signed and published a contestable open letter titled What We Are Fighting For, a letter from America. It obviously provoked an equally and radicalized sections of a new but younger generations of Ummah. Abu Bara asked the question point blankly, where are their statements? He's asking the American scholars, where are their statements of condemning the massacre against Muslims in Palestine, in Iraq, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Chechnya, in Eritrea, and in Kashmir? Where are their statements of denouncing the massacre of Kograt, in which 2,000 Muslims were burned alive over 20 days? You intellectuals, he's pointing at them, you intellectuals, where are your statements in which you express your condolence for all the victimized nations, in which you ask God to bless them with patience? Where are your statements in which you look at for the solutions of the complex problem of Muslim peoples? Where are your statements in which you describe the actual terrorism of these perpetrators and those who cooperate with them? Where are your statements concerning Muslim prisoners of war who are imprisoned in the Crusaders' custody? Or is it that Islamic subjugation to the West is more important than all the above? These questions, although not exhaustive, in their coverage of Muslim grievances against the West, yet find common ground with other voices of protest from the Muslim side. Numerous statements of Osama bin Laden, for example, harp on these questions ad nauseum. In his letter to the American people, he answers the question, why are we fighting and opposing you? And in that answer, he reiterates, you attacked us in Palestine. You attacked us in Somalia. You supported Russian atrocities against us in Chechnya, the Indian oppression against us in Kashmir, and the Jewish aggression against us in Lebanon. You steal our wealth and oil at paltry prices because of your international influence and military threats. Your forces occupy our countries. You spread your military bases through them. You have starved the Muslims in Iraq, where children die every day. You have supported the Jews in their idea that Jerusalem is their eternal capital and agreed to move your embassy there. These tragedies and calamities are only a few examples of your oppression and aggression, end of quote. These specific issues raised not only by Islamists like Abu Bara and Bin Laden and their supporters, but also by Muslim intellectuals, economists, political scientists, writers, and academics such as Tariq Ramadan, Shahid Alam, Ziauddin Sardar, Mahmoud Mamdani, and a host of others. They are totally ignored and dismissed as irrelevant to the unilaterally declared and endless war on terrorism by the US and its Western allies. The corporate media, with its phalanx of mercenary journalists, native informers, and comprador intellectuals who tout themselves as experts on Islam, which is, in Edward Said's words, part fiction, part ideological label, part minimal designation of a religion called Islam, they are in concert with the centers of power. While Said exposed the West's distortion of Islam, the humiliation it has inflicted upon Muslims, and its outright dismissal of their historical grievances, the Hollywood movie industry, backed by corporate capital and unrestrained by the centers of political power, is also on a mission to demonize Islam, dehumanize its followers, and devalue its contribution to civilization. On a cultural level, no other phenomenon has aggravated so acutely the growth of Westophobia than the misuse of the term freedom of expression. Historically, Islam and civilization has been the subject of Western ridicule and negative image making long before the ideas of the West was born. The almost entire intellectual and literary output of the Orientalist project was impregnated with that mission. Muslim response to this pernicious vocation had remained mostly passive but totally academic until the last quarter of the 20th century. That was at the time when modern means of information technology and communication were not there. The first Muslim violent response to challenge the West's anti-Islam mission ushered in with the publication of Salman Rushdie's Satanic Verses. Khomeini, without even reading this book, issued the notorious fatwa condemning the publication and called for Rushdie's assassination. Muslim masses in the hundreds of thousands came out to the streets, from Bradford in UK to Bombay in India and Jakarta, Indonesia, in support of the Imam's verdict. The production of the film Submission and the murder of its producer Theo van Gogh in 2004, the Danish paper Jyllands Posten's provocatory cartoons on Prophet Muhammad in 2005, Pope Benedict XVI, a controversial quote on the Prophet during his lecture at the University of Regensburg in 2006, and the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo's repeat performance of the cartoons in 2012 are all an outrageous depiction of the bloody side of freedom of expression. Anne Norton, a famous writer, has subtly exposed West's double standard in operationalizing the principle of freedom of expression, and she opines, these are his words, the true freedom of speech required not only the freedom to speak, but also the freedom to keep silent. However, all these episodes radicalized the Islamists and ended in riots, destruction, and deaths. In this age of virtual time, virtual distance, and instantaneous communication, information and images travel fast. The distortions, misrepresentations, and deliberate denigration of Islam and its followers, and the double standard shown in interpreting events in the Muslim world by Western audiovisual and printed media are listened, watched, and read by millions of Muslims. Just as the media megaliths like CNN, BBC, and CBC, for example, enter the Muslim households with their distorted, sanitized versions of happenings that impact Muslims Muslim world, so are Al Jazeera and the social media generated by Muslim agents themselves enter the same households with a counter version. This encounter between the two versions in particular is particularly noticeable in the manner of reporting the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that is at the heart of Muslim grievances against the West. The new generation of newspaper readers, radio listeners, and television viewers in the Muslim world are more discerning, technologically better skilled, and more restless than the previous generations. It is this restless post-modernist generation that heralded the Arab Spring of 2011, and it is this generation that is being radicalized and becoming militantly Westophobic. The failure of the Arab Spring to achieve its aspirations and freedom, democracy and economic justice on the one hand, and the conspired success in restoring the on-son regime in Egypt, aided by external forces on the other, has only accentuated the radicalization. The rise of the ISIS, my beloved writer Arundhati Roy describes ISIS as the macabre progeny of the war on terror. These are her words. The rise of ISIS represents the culmination of a radical wave that began in the late 1970s. Until now, and viewing from the Muslim side of the relationship between the Muslim Ummah and the Judeo-Christian West, has been marked by political mistrust, economic inequality, and cultural enmity. The Muslims then and now continue to be treated as the distant other by the Judeo-Christian West. Just consider the concept of Judeo-Christian values. I'm taking an example. Judeo-Christian values, what does it mean? This concept came into prominence after the Second World War in order to demonstrate to the Jews newly dawned compassion by the Christian West after centuries of humiliation and persecution culminating in the infamous Holocaust. It's a historical fact that all the three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, hails from the prophet of Abraham. Why then the reluctance to talk of Abrahamic values instead of calling Judeo-Christian values? Why you drop Islam here? The parlous economic condition of the Ummah adds another crucial dimension to the growing radicalization. Rising expectations and unemployment among Muslim youth, the dominance of a consumerist culture in the midst of widening wealth disparity, the control over economic resources, and commercial ventures by foreign capital have combined to create mass poverty, hunger, and increasing disenchantment with the economic status quo. Joseph Massad, a famous scholar from America, he succinctly captures the economic predicament of the Muslim countries in the face of imperialism and globalization when he writes, I'm quoting here, if Muslims refuse to convert willingly to liberalism, or at least to forms of Islam that liberalism finds tolerable, then they must be forced to convert using military power, as their resistance threatens the core value of liberalism. I'm sorry for the sticky papers from the plane. Already in 2000, Chalmers Johnson warned of a 21st century crisis in America's informal empire, based on the projection of military power and on the use of American capital and markets to force global economic integration on our terms at whatever cost to others. A radicalized and Westophobic Islamism is one of the consequences of this cost. Thus, radicalization among Islamists has its roots in the unresolved grievances of the Ummah against Western powers. Unless those issues are addressed with honesty and sincerity by the guardians of the world order, the permanency of that order is in jeopardy. Let me conclude this lecture by quoting Edward Said, his perspicacious conclusion in his masterly publication covering Islam. I'm quoting that at full so that some you may know. If the history of knowledge about Islam in the West has been too closely tied to conquest and domination, the time has come for these ties to be severed completely. About this, one cannot be too empathetic. For otherwise, we will not only face protracted tension and perhaps even war, but we will offer the Muslim world, its various societies and states, the prospect of many wars unimaginable suffering and disastrous upheavals, not the least of which would be the victory of an Islam fully ready to play the role prepared for it by reaction, orthodoxy, and desperation. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been listening to a very learned lecture by Dr. Amir Ali, taking us
Azeez was not only a senator for nearly 10 years in 52, but also was an eminent educationist and a brilliant scholar. Above all, his career as principal of Zahira College, Colombo, was a success. 13 years of his excellent service, Zahira became a unique college. Under the education scheme, all ethnic groups of boys studied and played together in brotherly feeling, with no discrimination of race, caste, religion, or social status whatsoever. It is not extraordinary to say that all teachers of both sex had the same mentality. Unity is strength. Dr. Azeez believed the value of education intends not only to boys, but also to Muslim girls. In the year 20, Dr. Azeez encouraged his cousin to appear for London matriculation examination, which resulted her to pass and to be the first and only one Muslim girl in the island. Thus, Marina, his only daughter, graduated in two fields at Sri Lanka University and Colombo University respectively. Dr. Azeez held several important positions in the public service. I need not, I think, according to this time, I was also asked at the first instance to cut short. But I have come from Gampa, mind you. But that is a different matter. So I'll have to stick to that. And thereby I will also get late. Therefore, it's better to go earlier. So anyway, therefore I cut short and say that in 1942, he was transferred to Kalmuni as assistant government agent. All that, I think have been told by certain speakers. Now I will come to this point in the upper house. The Senate was established in 47 under Salisbury Constitution, and Dr. Azeez was appointed to the Senate in 52. As an appointed senator, he made a valuable contribution not only to his community but to the entire country. Later he was the deputy food controller, all that. We have heard 1948 Mr. Azeez quit the civil service, 48, to take over as the principal of Zahira College, Colombo. The 13 years of his stewardship have been referred to as the golden era of Zahira. With efficiency, work, dedication and punctuality of both teachers and students, Zahira became one of the leading Muslim institutions in the country. All students moved as brothers in unity. student under two principles. The writer bears testimony as he was admitted to the college at the time of the former principal, Dr. T.B. Jaya, and continued during the tenure of office, Dr. A.M. Azeez. So I am a student of both principals. This speaker's article, single, was published in Azeez College magazine, and author received the first prize for singular, awarded by the then Prime Minister, Honorable S.W.R.D. Bandaranaike, for all of which speaker extends his gratitude to second mother Saira. As Azeez was so humble that a telegram was sent with best wishes on the occasion of speaker's wedding at YMBA Colombo 8. During this time, the college excelled in the fields of education, sports, scouting, debates, oratory, with well-equipped library and laboratory. Discipline was above reproach. In this contest, I should convey my earnest gratitude to Dr. T.B. Jaya, who was so kind enough to listen to my mother and do the needful regarding admission to the college, without which I would probably not have had open university education. And enter the government service. Therefore, I pray that Saira College to exist several hundred years in the future. In conclusion, I would say that Dr. Azeez received the Sahitya Award for his Tamil book, Islam in Ceylon, in 1963, from the Cultural Affairs Minister, and Doctorate of Letters in 1950 from the University of Jaffna. Not only Muslims, but also Sri Lankans lost a great personality of educational, religious and cultural values with his sudden demise at the age of 63 only. May Dr. Azeez be in communion with this spiritual belief. There are many tributes on the personality. He is a Muslim. He is from Jaffna. He looks like a burgher and acts like a Sinhalese. He lived a true Muslim and a Sri Lankan. That is the most important thing. I repeat, he lived a true Muslim. That is very important. And a Sri Lankan. That is all what we need. Thank you for patient listening. Thank you very much.
W. Ratnathil. I would like to once again invite Mr. Nahia, the author of the book, to give two more presentations. I would like to invite Mr. Faiz Mustafa to receive a copy of the book.
that they have contributed enormously to the development of those naturally Tamil and Tamil language. There are several others who have contributed enormously to the development. We talk about the contribution of Buddhists. You know about Manimegale. There are Christians who have contributed quite enormously. And there are Western scholars like Kamil Swelabil and so many others, Russian scholars, to the development of Tamil language. But in this kind of analysis, Muslim contribution to Tamil language and literature is very unique and noteworthy. And it has a very long history from Umar Pudavar, who wrote the Sirab Puran. That was long ago. If we trace the Sri Lankan Muslim contribution to Tamil language and literature, one has to go through the bibliography prepared by late Dr. Jamil, H.M. Jamil, who was able to identify about 3,000 literary works authored by Muslim scholars and writers in Tamil. Suvadi is the book. Atrupada is the list or something, right? I am not going into that. In the short speech, I am duty bound to speak a few words about Dr. Azeez and Mr. Nahia, the author of the book. I don't know where he is. Mr. Nahia is endowed with a multifaceted personality. He is an administrator, writer, Tamil scholar and a researcher. In fact, Mr. Nahia was working under the then State Minister of Hindu Affairs, Mr. Devaraj, who is present here. He is also present here after, I think about 25 years ago, Mr. Nahia worked under him. So, this 25 years and half a century are very important for me and Dr. Amir Ali and even Mr. Devaraj also, right? Mr. Nahia has written another 2 books of national importance, I would say. He has written about the contribution of Azeez to Tamil, and he has written about Swami Vibulananda and Muslims. These are very important book, 2 books. And he has already written about the contribution, Lives and Times of Shafi Marika. I had the opportunity of reading all these books because one book was very important. That is about Swami Vibulananda. That was his MPhil, Master of Philosophy thesis. I had an opportunity of reading it several times. I had to read for some other purpose. And he was awarded the Master of Philosophy degree by the University of Jaffna. It was the University of Jaffna which conferred doctorate to Dr. Azeez. That also should be mentioned. So the nature of the book prepared by Mr. Nahia, that his thesis was also on Vibulananda's contribution to Muslim education, etc. I think when I read that, I found that it deserved to be submitted for a PhD degree also. He is such a researcher, very good researcher, and I very much appreciate him for his work. Excuse me. The objective of Mr. Nahia in authoring this book was to document the contribution of Azeez to Tamil by engaging in research. It is a research study. He has used various research methodologies, primary sources, secondary sources, and prepared this book. But that was in 1980s or something, and he published that book in 1991. Now I am unable to see the book, whether it is ready or not, but with there are a lot of additions, and lot of corrections he has made. I know that, but I didn't see the new one. I have the old book, and which I would like to show it to you. This is the book that was published. This is the book that was published in 1991, and again, for the purpose of this occasion, I have to show you this book. We are going to release this particular book. which is having a lot of corrections and additions are also there. I was informed by Mr. Nahia. Sorry. He was also of opinion that this book of his research would pave the way for future studies on the life and times of Dr. Azeez. Still something has to be done, and it is up to the young intellectuals, Muslim scholars, to undertake such a research on life and times of Azeez. Mr. Nahia was not simply presenting Azeez's contribution, just presenting the data, but he had made an analysis and evaluation of the contribution made by Mr. Dr. A.M.A. Azeez by making a comparative analysis, a comparative study of viewpoints expressed by Dr. Azeez and various other Muslim scholars. All 21 chapters in the book, in the previous book, I don't know, I think in this new book, maybe more chapters, I don't know. I will go through it and see. All 21 chapters in the book are outcome of his research utilizing primary and secondary sources. I think Mr. Nahia has made an excellent contribution towards analyzing and documenting the role of one of the greatest Muslim scholars of Tamil and Tamil literature. As usual, Mr. Nahia has used very simple and lucid language for the benefit of the ordinary readers. It is important for the young Muslim scholars, young intellectuals, to undertake research and write about a galaxy of Muslim personalities and their national contribution. It's very important. We have to undertake, there were several Muslims who lived in Sri Lanka who made contribution at national level. It has to be exposed, it has to be ventilated, it has to be given publicity, because sometimes people think that the Muslims who are supporting or contributing only towards their own community, or Tamils were contributing only towards their own community, but they have done national contributions. I can even talk about quite a good number of Muslims who have done that. Now we have Akbar Hall at Peradeniya. Who is Mr. Akbar? He was a contributor to the development of the University of Ceylon in this country. That is why his name was given there. And that is Arunachalam Hall and even Ramanathan Hall. Why they have given these names? Because their contribution, they organized a Ceylon University movement which fought for the establishment of a university in this country. So like this, minorities have contributed a lot to the development of higher education in this country. In various other fields also, they have done a lot of work. The new generation of Muslims should know about their intellectual and academic heritage, and they should be proud about their forefathers. And that is the reason we need books like what Nahia has written. The modern Sri Lanka is not built by a few individual politicians, parochial politicians, or political parties. Several right-thinking intellectuals from minority communities also invariably participated in the task of nation building. This truth should be brought out by young Muslims and Tamil intellectuals following the example of Mr. Nahia, the author of Azeez and Tamil. Late Mr. A.M.A. Azeez was one of the greatest sons of Sri Lanka, born to a traditional Muslim family in Jaffna. He was one among several Muslims who contributed to national development during the Second World War days by being a forerunner of Green Revolution in the Eastern Province. He was very much appreciated and applauded by no other person than Honorable D.S. Senanayake, the then Minister of Agriculture at that time. Mr. Azeez organized a harvest festival in the Eastern Province, which was the first of its kind in the country. Mr. Azeez attended leading Tamil schools in Jaffna and was a brilliant student. He became a scholar, Tamil scholar. Dr. Azeez was highly was a highly respected and erudite Tamil scholar, fluent speaker in Tamil, and was well respected by the Tamil community both in the north and east. Mr. Azeez was closely associated with Swami Vipulananda during his stay in the eastern province, and this relationship lasted for several years. Dr. Azeez was a great lover of Tamil language and literature and contributed enormously towards the development of Tamil writing by authoring 8 books in Tamil. Now he has written extensively about all these themes in his books. Azeez knew so much of Tamil and would speak time and again about Tamil, its refined grammar, classical literature, everything he was talking about. In view of his background, he attended the first International Association of Tamil Research Conference in Malaysia, excellently conducted by Father Taninayu. The learned contribution made by Azeez at this conference was meticulously crafted in English, and audience were surprised at the wealth of knowledge displayed by the expert Azeez. Let me speak a few. கல்விமானாகவும் எழுத்தாளராகவும் பல்துறை அறிஞராகவும் விளங்கிய ஜனாப் ஏஎம்ஏ அசீஸ் அவர்கள் தேசிய ரீதியாகவும் தமிழ் பேசுகின்ற மக்களாலும் வடகிழக்கு மக்களாலும் நினைவு கூறப்பட வேண்டிய பெருமகனார் ஆவார். குறிப்பாக தமிழ் மொழி மீதும் தமிழ் இலக்கியத்தின் மீதும் மிகுந்த பற்று கொண்டிருந்த அசீஸ் அவர்கள் முஸ்லீம் தமிழறிஞர்களில் குறிப்பிடத்தக்க பெருமை வாய்ந்தவர். தமிழியலுக்கு Tamilology, he contributed enormously to the study of Tamilology. தமிழியலுக்கு மிக முக்கிய பங்களிப்பை செய்தவர். யாழ்ப்பாணத்தை பிறப்பிடமாக கொண்ட அன்னார் வாழ்ந்த சூழல் அவரது தமிழ் அபிமானத்திற்கும் தமிழ்துறை பங்களிப்புக்கும் உரிய தளமாக விளங்கியது. முஸ்லீம்கள் உயர்கல்வியில் பின்தங்கியிருந்த காலத்தில் தமது விடாமுயற்சியினால் வரலாற்று துறையில் பட்டப்படிப்பு படித்து ஆங்கிலத்திலும் தமிழிலும் புலமை மிக்கவராக அவர் விளங்கினார். அசீஸ் பற்றிய சகல அவருடைய எம்ஃபில் பட்டத்திற்காக அவர் எழுதிய அந்த ஆய்வு கட்டுரையை நான் வாசிக்க வேண்டிய ஒரு அவசியம் ஏற்பட்டது. நிச்சயமாக நஹியா அவர்கள் அந்த ஆய்வேட்டிற்கு, அந்த தீசிஸ், அதற்கு அவர் ஒரு கலாநிதி பட்டத்திற்கு சமர்ப்பித்திருந்தால் கூட அவருக்கு கிடைத்திருக்கும் என்று நினைக்கின்றேன்.
Dr. Azeez was alive as a great educationist and as a social reformer. I am sure he would have been very pleased to see one of his proteges, like Dr. Amir Ali, achieve the high levels of eminence in University of India and for doing excellent research on what sometimes can be perceived as very controversial topics. Dr. Amir Ali was not my classmate at that time. I remember that time there were only about 15 students in the University entrance HSC class, including Dr. Amir Ali. Because of the Azeez, that class of 15 produced 3 PhDs. Dr. Amir Ali is one, Dr. Shukri another, and Dr. Neville Singh another. Many doctors, many engineers, many professionals in banking and governance. It goes to show what good educational leadership can result in to society at large. So I must thank Dr. Amir Ali for coming all the way from Australia to make this presentation. I must also thank the YMMA for organizing. I also thank the past presidents, President Jalil, for the Yeoman Service Vendor, and all donors, old boys and Zaira, and the We must also thank newspapers, the TV stations, etc. for their support, to Mr. Balasingham, Mr. M.S. Rahim for their efforts in coordinating all this. Thanks all of you for marking your presence here, and Assalamu alaikum.